Pleased to welcome Deborah Rupp, who is a professor in the William Byam Chair in Industrial and Organizational Psychology at Purdue University. She conducts research on a wide range of topics, including organizational justice and corporate social responsibility. And her research has been cited by the Supreme Court, and she has worked with a variety of countries and other institutions, including UNICEF and the South Korean government. And although it's not said here, it could be even maybe the Culinary Institute of America, we don't know. She's published a lot of books and papers in a variety of journals. She sits on the editorial board of 6 journals. Take that, Michael. And she is the outgoing editor-in-chief of the Journal of Management. We're very pleased to welcome Deborah Rupp.
Thank you, John, for the introduction. Sarah, congratulations, and thank you for supporting 50 years of social science research. And thanks all of you for being here, allowing me to tell some stories about my field, industrial organizational psychology, or IO psychology. For those of you less familiar with this discipline, IO psychology is the scientific study of human behavior in the workplace. We apply psychological theories and methodologies to issues of relevance to individuals, organizations, and society. We seek to accurately estimate the cost and benefits of various sorts of work for employees, families, and organizations, and are experts in the areas of personnel selection, training, and program evaluation, and we often do such work on large scales, for example, for the military or within government agencies. As a result, our work makes significant contributions to our nation's economy, security, health, and well-being. My field, which is best represented by the Society of Industrial and Organizational Psychology, has a long history of doing work that is of relevance to policymakers and society at large. For example, we've recently had significant voice pertaining to the issues faced by older workers. This has included participating in the White House Conference on Aging, preparing invited comments for the United Nations Open Working Group on Aging, and coming up on May 12th, the presentation of a congressional briefing on issues pertinent to the aging workforce. In August, the Society held a congressional briefing focused on the science of recruiting, hiring, and training veterans returning to the civilian workforce. Similar briefings have been held on the psychological impact of furloughs, as well as the psychology of both unemployment and underemployment. But beyond briefings, the work that we do has had direct impact on issues of critical significance. Some salient examples have been IO psychologist Elizabeth Kolmstetter's work in rapidly recruiting, selecting, training, and onboarding the entire TSA workforce post 9/11, or Lori Foster Thompson's current role as a fellow on the White House Social and Behavioral Sciences team. But this forum is about personal stories, so I'm here to tell you mine. It's a story of organizational justice, ethics, and corporate social responsibility, issues of central importance to policy in that government is often in the business of upholding the rights of workers and citizens, quelling corruption, and protecting the natural environment. I started my career studying workers' experiences of unfairness or injustice in the workplace. Via both laboratory experimentation and field research that has been carried out by myself, my students, and my colleagues, this research has uncovered a number of insights. First, these experiences really matter. Large meta-analytic reviews, that is, statistical aggregations of hundreds of studies, which combined represent the responses of hundreds of thousands of employees across a wide array of jobs, industries, and locations, suggest that workers who feel fairly treated are healthier, happier, and more productive. They're also less likely to quit. On the flip side, when workers perceive themselves as having been unfairly treated, they show signs of stress. Both their health and productivity suffers, and there's an increased likelihood of a whole host of very damaging behaviors, such as theft, workplace violence, and increased turnover. Not to mention increased legal claims of harassment, discrimination, wrongful termination, and the like. The bottom line is that organizational justice, that is treating employees fairly, is good for both organizations and the people within them. As psychologists, we've sought to understand the origins of these reactions. Of course, people want to be treated fairly, but why? What are the motives that drive people to provide, seek, and react to justice and injustice in the workplace? Our research has uncovered 3 driving mechanisms. One, of course, is self-interest. We often seek fairness because, lacking complete information, it's the safest bet for maximizing our outcomes, or at least mitigating against being exploited. Here, the economists and the psychologists tend to agree. A second reason is more interpersonal in nature. It involves a psychological need for belongingness. Humans, as well as many other animals, need to feel they are valued by social groups, the workplace being a central social group and source of status for adult humans. It turns out that fair treatment sends a strong signal about this belongingness, and this has a strong impact on attitudes and behaviors at work. But it's the third reason where things get especially interesting, and where we move dramatically from traditional assumptions about economic self-interest and more toward universal, some would say hardwired norms of ethical behavior. That is, research shows that people expect other people to treat each other fairly, just because. And when these norms of social behavior are violated, people react with anger and punishment. Even Adam Smith, father of modern economics, has stated, how selfish soever man may be supposed, there are evidently some principles in his nature which interest him in the fortune of others and render their happiness necessary to him, though he derives nothing from it. Daniel Kahneman, famed psychologist who was awarded the Nobel Prize in economics, was one of the first to show evidence of this. Through a series of experiments where research participants had to make a number of resource allocation decisions, he and his colleagues were able to set up scenarios whereby the only way to punish someone who had been unfair in past rounds was to take less resources for oneself. This pitted self-interest and ethicality against each other. And in fact, their results showed that people punished unfairness in the form of withholding future resources, even when that meant losing out themselves. This was a really important finding. It showed that individuals not only care about their own treatment, but they also react to the treatment of others, and that these more ethical concerns for justice can sometimes trump self-interest. My students, colleagues, and I have spent several years following up on this research. We've replicated these findings in the laboratory under a number of different scenarios, and we've detected these same behavioral patterns among working people in organizations. It seems people are not always only out for themselves. They certainly are at times, and often are, but they'll also react with hostility, reduced performance, and civil disobedience when they observe others being treated unfairly, even when they have nothing in common with the victim, and even when they stand to be in no kind of future relationship with either party. And they'll even sacrifice their own resources to do so. This was exciting. It broadened the way we thought about social justice in the workplace, but it still reflected a fairly myopic focus on employees and their treatment. Really, this was just the beginning. The real game changer for me personally came in the form of a student showing up to my office hours to pitch a term paper idea. She was from India, Jyoti Ganapathy, and prior to coming to university, had worked with a number of NGOs that partnered with organizations carrying out social responsibility initiatives. This was part of a larger corporate social responsibility, or CSR, movement that was really sweeping over the Indian landscape at that time. So her pitch. She wanted to integrate the largely sociological research on corporate social responsibility, CSR, with the psychological research on organizational justice. It seemed to make sense that if people care about and react towards how others are treated, then all of this psychological research could be applied to how various stakeholders react to organization CSR initiatives, which largely focus on others, local communities, foreign labor markets, others' access to natural resources. It could also be applied to stakeholders' negative reactions to corporate irresponsibility, corruption, fraud, human rights violations, labor exploitation, and the abuse of natural resources. And this is a big deal, right? 2/3 of greenhouse emissions are argued to come from 90 large corporations. 1,100 of the factory workers killed in the 2013 Bangladesh factory collapse were supporting U.S. garment operations. Recently, the New York Times has reported, this was just last week, Americans view wage inequality as one of the most salient issues facing our nation and world today. So this idea of applying what we know about workplace fairness to understanding the broader context of corporate social responsibility changed the course of my career. You see, the social sciences are often quite siloed. You have psychologists, sociologists, economists, political scientists, law professors, all studying issues with important implications for individuals, organizations, and society, but not necessarily sharing this work with each other or working together to answer large-scale questions. And that was the case here. I'm embarrassed to say when Jyoti pitched her idea to me to integrate justice and CSR, I found it confusing. Back then, to an organizational psychologist, CSR referred to customer service representatives. Micro and macro organizational scholars were paying little attention to each other's work. Work that, if properly integrated, could have much more to say to policymakers, such as yourselves, about how to more effectively influence ethical and socially responsible behavior within and among organizations than any single discipline was doing at the time. Thus, through the prodding of a diligent student, I began paying closer attention to what other fields of study had been uncovering over the decades on defining the role of business in society, exploring and expanding approaches to business that include not only profit-seeking, but also people and planet, known as the 3 Ps or the triple bottom line, and documenting the connection between a firm's social performance and its financial performance. But the search also led me to discover significant gaps in these literatures. The why. Why do various stakeholders put pressure on firms to act more socially responsible? Are the motives of firms engaging in CSR entirely self-interested? Is CSR behavior really an organizational phenomenon, or in order to understand, predict, and increase the social responsibility of organizations, do we also need to understand the competing interests, motives, and values of groups and individuals, both internal and external to organizations? The situation was screaming for an interdisciplinary approach. So I symbolically and quite literally left the psychology building at the University of Illinois and went on a hunt for top scholars in other disciplines in hopes of forging a multidisciplinary consortium of scholars focused on uncovering actionable insights related to corporate social responsibility. And the rest is history. So for the last 10 years, I've been working very closely with law professor Cynthia Williams, economic sociologist Ruth Aguilera, cultural anthropologist John Conley, and all of our collective students to explore not only what motivates individuals and groups, both internal and external to organizations, to put pressure on firms to be more socially responsible, but also to explore the ways in which norms and trends surrounding corporate social responsibility practices serve to regulate the behaviors of people and organizations. This, by the way, is why CSR is of such interest to the field of law and why the University of Illinois offered me a position in their law school. Laws are inherently about influencing behavior when punishment is viewed as the only route to compliance. Yet understanding the psychology underlying behavioral choices and motivations has uncovered routes to social influence that both don't require the force of the law and may be more effective in influencing widespread social change, of course, in the presence of various forms of formal regulation. CSR voluntary codes of conduct are examples of this, and there are a lot of them, stemming from efforts of the UN, the ILO, the OECD, ISO, and various industry groups. So our multidisciplinary team has been quite busy. We first developed a comprehensive theory which applied the why justice framework I described earlier to map the self-interested, relational, and moral or ethical motives of individuals, organizations, nations, NGOs, and intergovernmental entities for pushing for increased social responsibility. And we've begun to collect empirical support for our ideas piece by piece. My student, Jyoti, she headed back to India to collect data revealing that even among very rural, very low-paid, and often illiterate factory workers, the values of their employer mattered to them and manifested in the form of loyalty, commitment, and performance, even controlling for the extent to which their own basic needs were being met. Back in the Midwest, a number of experiments conducted in my lab and then replicated among samples of employees revealed that the extent to which job applicants view a potential employer as being socially responsible is predictive of their willingness to work for the company. Further, once employed, the extent to which employees view their employers as socially responsible is predictive of their own individual citizenship behaviors at work. A particularly interesting finding we've just uncovered within the last few months involves the antecedents of socially responsible behavior within organizations. You might think that one way to increase ethical decision-making in an organization would be to hire people you've determined, perhaps through testing or assessment or pre-screening of some kind, to be high on ethical traits or values. Whereas our research does show that those with more proactive personalities and an overall sense of felt responsibility engage in more ethical behaviors at work, this is not necessarily the only route to catalyzing such behaviors. That is, we find that a climate or culture of social responsibility can have a strong normative effect on ethical behaviors, such that even those without such personality traits can be moved towards increased ethical behaviors simply in reaction to their environment. One way such climates or cultures can be created is via leadership. We've argued that CSR initiatives provide leaders within organizations to connect with and empower employees in alternative ways. It provides leaders a way to express their more socially oriented values and provides employees more exposure to leadership, as well as providing them with leadership opportunities themselves. Through leadership development within the context of pro-social initiatives, both organizations and society are benefited. Broader still, our research has looked closely at the role of institutional investors in creating softer forms of regulation that have had the effect of organizations engaging in more socially responsible and environmentally sustainable behaviors. Banks want to mitigate risk in the context of lending. Social responsibility and environmental sustainability among the firms lent to or invested in can mitigate such risk. Our research has shown that banks requiring their client organizations to comply with social and environmental standards creates an external incentive for organizations to engage in CSR. But it does more than that. It also creates norms of behavior that our research has shown to trickle down and around to other aspects of organizational functioning not directly tied to the original investment, creating the types of climate and culture I mentioned just a moment ago. To provide a concrete example, and taking this one step further, Dutch Central Bank, which would be the equivalent to our Federal Reserve, is carrying out explicit interventions to influence their culture of corporate social responsibility. They've hired 8 organizational psychologists who work directly with Dutch bank boards, their CEOs, and the banks as a whole to track, give feedback on, and promote ethical decision-making within the Dutch banking industry overall. We currently have a proposal under review to study and evaluate this process more directly. So those are some highlights aimed at telling the story of one social scientist. I hope they've exposed you to the field of industrial organizational psychology. We've left some flyers on the table and an invitation to the congressional briefing next week for those of you who are local in the DC area. I hope that we've given you a sense of what we're doing to impact policy and society, and illustrated how we've gone about connecting with a number of other social science disciplines to more deeply understand the ways in which organizations engage with society. The social sciences are so well positioned to not only uncover insights regarding the intersection of business, social responsibility, and environmental sustainability, but also to provide guidance in terms of best practices and evaluation of social responsibility initiatives. We really can work together to make the world a better place for everyone, and I hope my story provides but one small example of that. Thanks.